The 1920s was a decade which witnessed the development of mass production, cinema, jazz, and the introduction of prohibition. Nicknamed the Roaring Twenties, this decade was a celebration of youth and its culture. In this period of relative prosperity, the new generation questioned values of the past and were able to experiment with new values and radical styles of the future. These liberal times brought about new ideas and theories about the world. One theory that became popular during the 1920s was the controversial theory of evolution. The theory of evolution suggests that all species are descendants of a common ancestor through a process of natural selection. During the 18th century, the well-known naturalist and scientist Charles Darwin published his theory of evolution in his two books entitled On the Origin of Species and the Descent of Man. Darwin believed that through natural selection, a process based on the survival of the fittest, organisms could evolve in order to become better suited to their environment and therefore more likely to survive. This theory was introduced at a time when religion played a large role in people's lives, and many found this theory atheistic and disrespectful. During the 1920s, however, this theory was still being discussed, and it caused tension and controversy between those who accepted the theory and the growing number of fundamentalists who had a strict interpretation of the Bible. Unfortunately, since neither theory can be proven or disproven, this controversy is still prevalent today. One of the most prominent and well-known battles between science and religion pitted the theory of evolution against the belief of creationism, the theory that a supernatural being created the world and its organisms. This battle became known worldwide as the Scopes monkey trial. The Scopes trial was an American court case that took place in the summer of 1925 in response to the Butler Act, a bill enacted in Tennessee during February 1925. This act made it illegal to teach any theory that denied the story of divine creation, such as evolution. News of this bill quickly spread through the country, and the American Civil Liberties Union decided to fight back. The ACLU began to search for a willing teacher who could stand up in a court case against the act. The man who took this chance was 24-year-old John Scopes, a science teacher and coach from Dentin, Tennessee. Scopes agreed that in order to teach biology, one must be able to teach evolution in the classroom. The court case began. Working on the defense, the ACLU hired attorneys Clarence Darrow, Arthur Garfield Hayes, and Dudley Field Malone. The prosecution's legal team included three-time presidential candidate William Jennings Bryan, A.T. Stewart, and Ben B. McKenzie. At the start of the trial, the defense's intention was only to oppose the Butler Act, which they deemed unconstitutional because it violated the separation of church and state. However, once the trial began, it turned into a debate over the interpretation of the Bible and William Jennings Bryan's knowledge of the Genesis and science. After 7 long, hot days, the trial was finally coming to an end. Clarence Darrow wanted the opportunity for the case to be appealed to the Tennessee Supreme Court. Therefore, he asked the jury to return a guilty verdict. The jury agreed with Darrow, denying William Jennings Bryan the chance to deliver his closing statement and leaving Scopes with a $100 fine, which the ACLU promptly paid. Nearly a year after the case was closed, the Tennessee Supreme Court declared that the verdict should be reversed on account of a technicality. However, instead of investigating the case more thoroughly, the Supreme Court dismissed the case, and it wasn't until 1967 that the state legislature finally abolished the Butler Act. While the Scopes trial ended years ago, it appears this controversy between the separation of church and state is still prevalent today. Several decades later, during the 1990s, a new theory was proposed for the evolution of man. This new theory became known as intelligent design. According to the New World Encyclopedia, intelligent design is the view that it is possible to infer from empirical evidence that certain features of the universe and of living things are best explained by an intelligent cause that is not natural selection. In 2005, this theory of intelligent design set off a court case similar to the Scopes trial in context. This case took place in Dover, Pennsylvania, when a local school board decided that when evolution was being taught in biology class, teachers should be required to teach about intelligent design first. Parents challenged the Board of Ed in a 6-week trial, claiming that their decision was a breach on the Establishment Clause. The Kitzmiller versus Dover trial resulted in the removal of the requirement because it determined that requiring teachers to teach intelligent design was unconstitutional. The Scopes trial was one of the most memorable debates between science and religion, or evolution and creationism. However, despite the consistent attempts at teaching both theories in the classroom, it appears we still have a long way to go before the controversy ends and church and state can coexist peacefully.
Yung church. Ang church is yung mga tao. So yung state is tao din, yung sa church tao din. Indifference lang sila sa policies. Bakit kaya alam ang simbahan sa estado? Kasi ang nasa simbahan, tao man din, they are concerned whatever activity comes from the state. Yung policies, ang policies ng estado is iba. Ang policies sa simbahan is iba. But we are one because tao. The church is the structure, but yung tao.
So, sir, feel mo, tama yun na pakinggan din yung opinion ng church.
Kasi ang church is yung tao.
So, yung about, sir, sa RED, yung mga yung ayaw ng church na gustong pasulong ng gobyerno.
So, in regards sa extreme, ang bakit ayaw na simbahan? Because ang simbahan is pro-life. Ang sa estado is anti-life. Once you are using a conductivity that is anti-life, we are going to cut the obligations of the people na yung ang gusto na simbahan is huwag mong i-cut ng kasi pro-life sila pro-life sila.
Sure, not
ang gina-promote ng state is using contraceptive. That is the very reason by using yan simbahan. Because the simbahan is using contraceptive, they are using the natural family planning method. yun.
So, ano yung mas effective na decision sa church or sa
Ang sa Estado, tinignan na lang nila, because if there is problem arises from this case, ano ba bang nagagawa ba ng kasimbahan? Because if the private arises, hindi punta sa Estado. Kung mayroong problema, pag umubo na yung population, hindi na sila pupunta sa simbahan, pupunta magigila sa Estado. So, that's why yung case, gumagawa sila ng statutory procedures na hindi nilolobo yung population not make balloons. Hindi lumubo. Yung man ang stand
Okay, for me sa church and state are two different institutions. So dili pwede makialam ang church sa state. Well, in fact, ang state po sa church. But on the issue of RH bill, it is so immoral nga ikuan yun ang RH bill. Because as we all know, ang state gina-proclaim nila ang contraceptives. As we all know, from the word contra means to counteract. Then septives means conception. So, i-counteract nila ang conception sa isa ka tao. And as we all know, kung mag-contraceptive sila, even though nga dugo pa lang na, there is the development of human being. If there is the development of human being, there's the development of senses and the organs. And the first jud nga mag-develop ana is the heart. So, kung kuan lang ka ng abortion or ka ng mga contraception nga pampalaglag, ilahan ng ikuan or condom, di kuan jud ang ma-contradict nila ang conception sa isa ka lady, and also it will also cause harm sa katong babae nga nagakuha natong mga contraceptives, and also sa political issues. Siguro kana it is the problem of the state na dili na pwede makialam ang church sa state kay diba naman na law nga dili pwede makialam jud ang church sa state issues.
So ano po yung effective na ano po yung dapat sundin ng tao, yung decision ng church or ng state if may problem na dumating?
The church and the state must dapat sabay ang church and state. As kung to for morality church, kung sa i-promulgate ang message dapat ang state ang maghimo.
So, ano po, ibig sabihin, kailangan maging aswan ang church
yes.
and state. Di pwede silang mag-decision ng kanya-kanya.
No. Because ang decision para sa people is the decision of the state. As we all know, Bos Populi, Bos Populari. The voice of the people is the voice of God.
You know, one of the most controversial phrases that you'll hear today, and I think most of us have heard it 100 times or more, is this phrase, the separation of church and state. This is in all of our press today, it's in our schools, even our pastors talk about it today, the separation of church and state. And we're all told, of course, that it comes right out of the Constitution, and that's what we're supposed to do, is to respect the separation of church and state. I think most Christians, or Americans in general, are just surprised when they find out that the separation of church and state is not in the Constitution. The language, separation of church and state, does not appear at all. As a matter of fact, the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States says, Congress shall make no law regarding the establishment of religion or prohibit the free exercise thereof. That's the actual text of the First Amendment. Now, the concept of the separation of church and state actually comes out of a letter from Thomas Jefferson that he wrote to a group of Baptists in Connecticut around the time in which the Constitution was being adopted. And these Baptist folks in Connecticut were very concerned that the state was going to take over the church. And so to calm their fears, Thomas Jefferson wrote this very famous letter, which has now become seen as dogma. And he let the Baptists know that, no, look, there's a wall that's there, so the state cannot get into the church and begin to manipulate and control it. And so it was actually a design by Thomas Jefferson to calm the Baptists and let them know the state was never going to mess with the church or go ahead and get into it. Now what's happened here after a couple hundred years of history has passed on is just the opposite has happened. Instead of protecting the church from the state, what has happened today in our country is the state is now being protected from the church. And therefore, we have lost our public spirituality and Christianity today by using the Constitution in a way that it was never intended to do. Because remember, in the end, the state always has the guns. The church never does. And so the founding fathers, including Thomas Jefferson, never intended to protect the state from the influence of Christianity or the church. It did, however, intend to protect the church from the state and its coercive power. And so I think for all of us, particularly in this hour, we need to recover what that really means for us and recover the Christian roots of the Constitution and its purpose to protect us and give us freedom of our faith in these days.